Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. All right. Well, we are back here with Mick Mulroy and myself, Adam Piercy. We are podcasting. Mick is abroad right now, but we're still getting good signal from Mick. So we'll
Yes.
say thank you, Mick, for being with us again today.
Yes, it's been a pretty hectic bunch of days. We were in South Sudan working on a food aid delivery program, and then we left there trying to get into Amman, Jordan, and then the war started. So they turned our plane around because the airspace was closed. So we are holding up in the UAE. That's where I'm coming to you from today.
Okay. Well, I am hoping you're getting good weather there. But today, especially, I think the topic from today resonates when you're going through some of the challenging situations that I know that you face in your work. Um, as Stoics, we tend to uh, always gravitate back towards the core virtues of Stoicism, and there are four of them: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. And today, I think you and I were hoping to talk a little bit about those. Not so much to define them in any formal academic sense, I think, but to talk about what they mean to Stoics and then what they mean to us as practitioners. So, did you have any opening thoughts you wanted to start with today, Mick?
No, I think, Adam, we're going to be talking about this a lot, right? Because they're four cardinal virtues of Stoicism and probably go deep. But I thought we'd start off just kind of talking about these and maybe some examples that we both could think of in real life and get the wheels turning with the audience and how
Yeah,
they view it.
absolutely. I think it is important for people to um, have a I usually think of them as a waypoint because Stoicism is not a dogmatic tradition in the sense of it's not rigid to the point where there's only one way to see this, and anything about that thought that is outside of that view is therefore, I don't know, heretical to an extreme is probably the word you would use.
Right.
And so we get to talk about it, and I actually think that's one of the beautiful things about Stoicism is that it's not dogmatic like that. You can discuss these, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but I think having a direction, calling them cardinal virtues, right, which was a term that has been used for a long time, and I know you use that as well, does reflect like the cardinal points on a compass. So there is direction to those, and so I think it's important for people who are practitioners like this. So I was going to start with not the first one that I said, but actually the second one because I always that was one of the ones I love to get people's inputs on, which is the virtue of courage. So, what? Let's start with courage and what, as a definition, it means. I think to Stoics. What do you think?
So I think as a descriptive, courage is, it is what you think of when you think of, when you traditionally think of courage. It is the soldier on the battlefield risking his or her life to save another, or a fireman going into a burning building to save a child, risking his own life to do so. That's obvious. I certainly can think of some examples, and I'll give you one that I witnessed. And then, but it's not just that, right? It's also the courage to not sit at the back of the bus in a segregated southern United States in the 60s, right? Obviously, referring to Rosa Parks. That's also courage. So, courage can exist in many forms and certainly in many different people. And I think both are examples of what I would think as a Stoic courage is. And I'll start with the first example. So, I mean, I've spent my whole life in conflict zones. I've seen uh, many examples of courage, fighting the enemy, trying to get to a fallen colleague. But one of the ones that I think stuck out to me the most is an example of two of my very close friends, Nate Delabar and Brian Hoke. They were, I don't know, friends for 20 years, and they were about almost 50 years old, which is pretty old for somebody to be running around on the battlefield. And they were conducting an operation, two senior people, to capture some terrorists. And Brian, who was trying to get in a position so he could look into this very large compound where these people were, a lot of armed men, so he could see in to see if they were compromised before the element of the force would breach and then go in and try to capture these people. And he realized that they had been compromised, and he was trying to call on the radio to inform the assault team, which Nate was with, that they were compromised. And at the same time, Brian was shot at and struck. But at the same time, he's falling down the ladder. He's calling in just what they have and where they are to try to make sure that Nate knows, so he doesn't go in. So he's on the top of a roof, and he falls backwards, and he's in a pretty compromised position. So Nate, and the reason why I know this is when all this was over and they called us in, um, we watched the video from the ISR feed, right? So one of the hardest things I ever did, because as you might guess, they were calling us in to inform us that they had both died. But when Brian was on the roof, Nate, and you can see this on the video, was trying to get up on the roof and run across a very open space to pull Brian to safety. And you could see, the moment when he finally got his hands on the ledge to pull himself up. And you could see that moment is when he decided that he was going to do it. And I know that he knew the risk. There's unquestionably knew the risk. That was the most courageous thing I've ever seen. And I've seen something like that, but never like that. Never that. Where he ran out in the middle of gunfire, stood side by side with Brian, and they fought to the end. They both were killed there. They were then both, brought home. And then there's a star. There's two stars on the wall at the CIA headquarters, and they were buried in the same ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery and put side by side. So I pass that story because there is those moments. You can believe you're brave. You can hope that you'd be brave in the end. But I think one of the things that Stoics really push is this idea that we're all going to die, but how you die is the only thing you can control. And I think that was probably the strongest example I've ever seen. And again, I've seen a lot of things on the battlefield um, of just pure and utter courage. Are you there?
I'm there.
Okay. Okay. I
Nope.
know.
No, I was just
Uh,
make see I was giving you a pause in case, and I can edit this out. Don't worry. I was giving you a pause in case you were still going to continue on. Well, Mick, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that story with us. I have heard that story before. There's always a little bit of extra nuance that you provide when we talk about this, and I think, it's important to note that it's easy for someone, I think, to brush something like that off as somebody's duty or something like that. But the thing is courage, and you and I have spoken about that. It's not just about duty; it's also about when you know that this, as you were highlighting in the circumstance you just described, when you know it is going to be potentially a life risking scenario or a certain life risking scenario, and then you still do that action. I mean, that is true. That is true courage, I think. And it's simple to think that these people that are doing this are emotionless, or that they are so highly trained that they don't feel things, and we know that that's not true. And I think you and I have spoken about this before, so it's resonating with you as I'm saying this, that it's not just about, oh well, I'll be fine, so I'll go do that. That's not, that is it can be courageous, but the true courage is when you know that it's potentially going to be the last act that you do, and you still do it. I mean, that's where real courage shines through. I
It
do,
is, and
yeah,
that was above and beyond. I mean, he received the equivalent of the Medal of Honor from the
right,
CIA, and Brian,
right,
basically the Silver Star.
yeah,
So he's recognized as such. But that is something I think that will always. And Nate's two of my four goddaughters are his daughters.
yeah, yeah, and I think for me, I think it resonates for me as well in similar circumstances as yours. And I, I, I think some people sometimes feel like it falls on deaf ears when you speak to courage being something in an office or in a workspace, right? Like I certainly don't have. I will never say that it is the same. What the extreme scenarios in the world that you and your colleagues have experienced are um, unmatchable in that way. And not that it's a competition, but certainly it is something that is um, not the same. We'll say they're not the
Yeah,
same, and that's okay. But when I talk, I work with the space program. We've talked about that, and going through history, right? I mean, a very big example of the space program is the Challenger disaster, right? And I'm
yes.
quoting, a great example of that is from Adam Higginbotham's book called Challenger. And the thing about Challenger that's interesting is like there were so many people who raised their hand and said, "This is not right. You should not launch. This is not okay." The night before the Challenger launch, there was one of the managers said, "I am not signing this letter that says it's okay to launch. I am not signing this." And he didn't. And there were and weeks and months, and I think it might have been 2 years beforehand. There were people at the rocket manufacturer saying, "There's a problem here. You have to fix it. You've got to do this." And it led to them becoming pariahs. And I'm not trying to draw the parallel between this experience and the story that you were telling, but I think when you step forward and do the right thing, when you are going to be ostracized, when you are going to be, in a sense, capped in your career development and capped in your personal and social development because of doing that, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we know that people like this get repercussions when this happens, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But but you stand up and do that because it lives are on the line because and these are extreme scenarios, I know, but I think it's something that it's similar in the sense of that things there will be consequences. You know that there will be consequences, and you know I think in both circumstances that not the extent of the consequences, obviously, but in both circumstances, I think things are going to happen that are not optimal, and you still do it because it is the right thing. I think that's courage in its own way, and that's a tough. Some people have a think they sort of are like courage in the boardroom isn't really a thing or whatever, and I'm like, well, it's different. It's not the same, but to me, that's what it is. It's courage to do the right thing, courage to stand up and have the tough conversation, even like for someone who there are people in my life who suffer from extreme social anxiety, and for them raising their hand to ask a question in a room full of people is a fate that is severely bad, right?
Yeah,
And
introverted.
they still
Well,
do it. They still do it, and I'll shout out to my very close friend Star Lord, his real name's David, but we have superhero nicknames, which is another story. And he will put his hand up and do that, and I have always been proud of him for doing that because it takes a lot of courage to do that. So I think in some ways it resonates. It's just a matter of degree. So, anyways, I
yeah,
think you're right. But for Stoics, I think they would look at courage as it's this moral thing where you're doing the right thing.
I
So
agree. And standing up to power, right? Wasn't it Rufus, Masonius Rufus, who would criticize the Roman Emperor, right?
yeah,
Which is pretty relevant right now. Like,
yeah,
it's easier just to just keep your mouth shut,
yeah,
right? And but you have somebody with absolute power like a Roman Emperor, um,
yeah,
criticizing it was an act of courage. I mean, obviously, your criticism should have logic and all that, but doing it, um, even if it would risk your career, like you were talking about, or even your being, I think that is another example of courage. Do you speak up when it is not easy?
yeah. I think so. and that's the tough thing. I'll leave one final step, which is about that is with my partner when we have talked. I said to her one time after we had a challenging conversation, I said, you know, I'd rather have the toughest conversation in the universe with you than speak you know, just have nice things to say with an asshole, right? Like I'd rather do the tough
Mhm.
conversation because it's the right thing to do, and there's more trust and everything else gained there. So I think,
Yep.
but it that so actually that's a good lead in though to our next one, which the next concept, speaking of you know challenging conversations and talking with others, is justice and justice. Um, the justice that I usually come across is this idea of justice in a judicial sense, in the sense of you know some sort of fairness between right and wrong. But the justice that I see within Stoicism is more of a social justice in the sense of magnanimity and good treatment of others, treating people fairly and equally, because we are all citizens of the same. I think cosmopolis is a word that we sometimes use.
Yep.
So does that resonate with you for that word? I mean, that's how I mean, I know in some ways I'm rhyming off of some of the texts of modern Stoic writers, but that I think is pretty close. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I think you nailed it. Justice. I mean, part of justice is opposing injustice, right? Um, we should all seek justice for everyone. You know, what's good for the bee is good for the hive. You know, really, it's this famous statement. So justice shouldn't just be about what you view as fair to yourself. It should be you're equally um, an advocate for justice for everyone equally. That is, I think, one of the things in human history that has really made a democracy and a democracy with individual liberty and human rights um, really stand out is the idea of justice, you know, what we call due process under the law, where people are treated fairly and equally, and that there is an actual process that would lead to, at least in the criminal sense, justice. But there's also justice in equal rights and equal opportunity. And I think that that is something that has been a part of Stoicism um, since before and through many democracies, versions of democracies, and even in times of autocracies. The Stoics have pushed that concept.
Yeah, I mean, we see throughout history, right, that and it's tough sometimes with justice for people because Stoics the first Stoics existed in a time period where slavery was common. It was normal, right? But it
Mm-hmm.
was also it was different than the type of slavery I think we speak about from the like the pre-Civil War South in the
Yeah.
U.S., right, or in other parts of the world. It was a different kind of. Now, I'm not saying it was good. No one's saying it was good, but it's similar. But justice is an interesting concept there because you know, there were Stoics who, at a time where slavery existed, and a time where women were very much, I don't know if sidelined is the right term, but it probably is, right? Um, there were Stoics who were like, women could do. I can't remember who it was, but like women can do philosophy, and you know,
Oh
you should
yeah.
treat your slaves well, right, and all of that. And but it is still it's a tough
I mean,
equivocation to
remember,
make.
I mean,
You know,
Epictetus was a slave. I mean, the
he
name
was a
means
slave, yes,
slave, right?
and he
Yeah,
was taught philosophy. He was allowed to learn. I guess it was allowed to learn philosophy through
yeah,
his owners, right? Which I think,
that's correct.
you know, but I think as well, you know, justice is an interesting one in our workforces because in your world and in my world, I think one thing that would probably be very common is that we just can't go screwing around with you know treating those around us like crap, right? We need the support of those around us all the time. We need those people to be firing on all cylinders all the time, right? Whether it's in a
Yeah.
war zone or even in a boardroom. I'm not a board member. I just mean like in a meeting in a room in an office, right? Like I say so many times to people in my world. And I am very lucky, actually, to say that I have a team that is made up of men and women. I have coworkers that are trans. I have coworkers that are members of the LGBT community. I have many coworkers that are English as a second language. And it's. I actually think that it improves my life by having that environment, because it teaches us all that intelligence and good work and all of that can come from anywhere, and you just have to treat people with a bit of kindness and respect, and I believe justice, in order for those things to work well. And I'm making an assumption, so I'd love to hear your back from you on this. But in your world, when you have a unit that's put together, you have to, like, everybody's essentially got to be pulling in the same direction, right? But it also means that you have to be able to depend on those, and they have to depend on you.
That's right.
So how does that
Yeah.
fit with your how does that fit in your world in terms of justice?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. One, and this is spoken about by Rufus, it should be justice in all things. One that doesn't pay attention to justice in small things doesn't do it in big things. So it's in everything. And whether it is how you deal with people that aren't like you, because it might be a natural thing to be attracted or at least want to associate with people that are similar to yourself. Um, that's, to your point, not going to build your character. You should seek to be with people that are not, don't think you like you, and that maybe didn't come from your background. But you need to treat them the same. And ultimately, this treating the same is what the concept of justice. People should feel that they have that, and that you're a just person, right? Which is a little different way of talking about justice. That if you are a just person, so I mean, I know we're going to go way deeper on this, but into your other point on like slavery, for example, or place in women in society. If you look at Zeno's Republic, his answer to Plato's Republic, it's incredibly forward looking. I mean, at the time, I don't even think there's a place that exists today that would be modeled after what Zeno's view of the world should be, which was total equality among people, among genders, races, genders. Um, and Stoics have always viewed your status as not necessarily relevant to whether you had lived a good life. It was, and we're talking about it right now, your adherence to these principles, to whether you're a good person. And I think that's ultimately, if you look at that core document, and of course it doesn't exist except for fragments and being talked about by other Stoics to come after Zeno. But if you look at that, and I did a whole paper on how Zeno's Republic is an answer to this surge toward autocracy that we're seeing today. I would recommend Autocracy Incorporated, a book that's been recently out, and it really does show a troubling trend away from democracy and toward autocracy. Uh, that this philosophy, which is expanding greatly and quickly, is one of the antidotes. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but it is, and I think the more people read about it, follow it, the better.
Yeah, so I mean, so many of those things resonate as being universal to me. They apply all over the map. It's that thing where it doesn't just exist in your world or mine; it exists across it, right? So I think that in some ways, justice is its own justice. You have to live it in this universal sense. Um, yeah, I had an interesting run-in with a coworker recently who came to my desk and said they brought somebody with them, and the person they brought with them looked pretty shaky. And I said, "Hey, what's up?" And they were like, "This is my friend. This is a coworker. They were young. They were like a junior member, and they were like, "Oh, this is my friend, and they have a problem they're going through." And I said, "Okay." And they said, uh, "Can they talk to you?" And I was like, "Sure." I don't. Yes. What's like? I thought they were asking me about like space program stuff, and it turned out that it was an interpersonal relationship issue at the office, like in the sense of two coworkers not having a really good time.
Hmm.
and they came to talk to me because they were like, we just know that we can tell you stuff. And it was funny. I was telling somebody about it later, and they were like, how did you do that? And I was like, what do you mean? They were like, how did you make it so that people can talk to you? I said, I don't know. I think it's just that you treat them with fairness, right? And they want to talk to you
Yeah,
about stuff.
which is
So
part. Yeah, what part of justice?
yeah,
Fairness.
and I think that's what it is. You know with me that you get a fair shot, as it were, in some ways, right? Like I'll ask people about stuff, I'll call people out. I don't agree with the idea that, being fair to people is expressing everyone's opinion. I think in today's day and age, I will be fair to listen to everybody's opinion, but if I think it's wrong, I feel like it's okay to say that. And I think there's a lot of people, even in my country, in Canada, that I would disagree with on certain topics, but at the same time I can listen to them. But if they're wrong, they're wrong, right? So like you get, which is unfortunate, but to say that way, but true. In my line of work, there's definitely wrong answers. Engineering is always like that. But yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it.
But like,
So
here's
then,
here's another example of being just, which you said also includes fair.
yeah,
That, I think if you look at the way Socrates taught, he taught people how to think, not what to think. Right? And I hear, and I believe it to be true, a lot of teachers nowadays basically want parents of themselves. They just want the kids to say what they think about the world. That's not that's not fair. You should promote the idea of individual thought. If a student has a good argument, even if you don't agree with that position, you shouldn't be penalizing for it. You should be actively promoting the difference and diversity of thought. And just because somebody doesn't share the way you think of whatever topic you want to throw out there, unless it's like math, right, where it's like there's a right or wrong answer, you should be you should be promoting that. And I think at least there's a perception. And if you look at the statistics on at least what Americans think about what's going on in universities right now, it's not a Socratic system anymore, according to the way people view it. They view it as more of a indoctrination, and that's
yeah.
not a just way to teach, in my opinion.
No. And it's interesting because living and working in the world of engineering as I have for so long, you always believe it's a meritocracy in the sense of like it's based off of real outputs and real tangible results and hard work, right? And in today's day and age, I remember seeing I don't know what kind of poll it was exactly, but there was a poll that was saying that the majority of people now feel like plain old hard work doesn't get you there, in the sense of like if you do the work you're not seeing the results. It feels unfair to people, and it's just like I don't know that that's a place that I want to live in. So it goes stepping back to our first virtue that we spoke about, courage. Like in some cases, you have to the virtues work together, and you have to say, well, if people aren't getting fair treatment, if they're not getting justice, then you have to have the courage to step in. And as a team leader as I am able to do that, which is nice, but it's not easy some days, right? So we
Yeah,
should
as a
go to.
leader, justice
Oh,
is a
sorry.
big. No, as a leader, justice is a big part of it, and you
Absolutely.
really have to focus on that for yourself.
You have to. You have to. So then, the third virtue is temperance, and this is an interesting one for us because temperance comes with a connotation specific to um, one of the sort of progenitors of the practice was or someone who studied the practice back in the day. He ended up generating like creating REBT and CBT and whatnot, and he helped
Yeah,
write the the uh, the the 12 what is it, alcohol, like the Alcoholics Anonymous 12
yeah,
step program and
that's
whatnot.
right.
Yeah,
With the prayer.
so temperance comes with a really interesting connotation in that it feels very alcohol oriented or addiction oriented, right? Which I'm not going to say is a bad one, because obviously that's what it's trying to do. You're trying to get to a good place with that sort of personal challenge. But temperance in our world also is temperance in character, temperance in demeanor, temperance in reaction, right? I think temperance is an interesting one for me too, because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Like I do believe in temperance, but sometimes people think that Stoics are robots, right? I am a nerd, so some people will say, well, Stoics are Vulcans, right? And I'm like,
Right,
no, no,
right,
no.
right.
Vulcans are repressing their emotion, right? They're suppressing it, or they're taking it away. the temperance side of it is more temp um, moderating it, right? You're sort of moderating it so that it doesn't control you. Is I think the way that Stoics would see that. But it's an interesting, like I said, double-edged sword because so many people are like, well, I don't want to be like, I can't be emotionless, and it's like, okay, well, we don't want to be emotionless. I think the stories that you and I have told already show that there is deep emotion tied to this practice and tied to the experiences that we have seen, especially those
Hmm.
very serious ones. It's
And
more
I
the
think,
case of not being held um, under water by these emotions or being held hostage by these emotions, right? So, what do you think?
yeah, I think Albert Ellis is the one that's at least was one of the early progenitors of CBT and cognitive behavior therapy. I think he called it something else, but I cut off. And he specifically said that he was inspired by Stoicism, right, to start that. I know this because I have my daughter's a psychology degree, so I hear about that a lot. And Donald Robertson, of course, one of our friends and well-known writer on Stoicism, is himself a cognitive behavior therapist, a psychologist. But right, so that it's not the things themselves that disturb us, but the opinions we have of them. Right, I'm paraphrasing Epictetus. That's, I think, part of what temperance is having that emotional resilience and, quite frankly, emotional IQ, which people are talking about is now in many ways uh, as important, or maybe even more important than your intellect, like how much you know, but how you deal with other people, particularly if you're on a team, is just as important. But I'd also add that, and I've always viewed temperance as, and let's see if we get comments on this, and it's more self discipline to me. Temperance is a kind of odd word, for me at least. Is that I kind of just view it as somebody who's meek. Maybe I just have the wrong impression of it. Certainly, Stoics are meek. We've already talked about the courage. And we can go down a list of very heroic Stoics. But I would
Right.
say, what, or maybe it's a flip side to it: emotional intelligence, but also self discipline, and uh, just having the physical and moral toughness to continue on in the face of adversity, to go into adversity with it as a challenge. The obstacle is the way, so to speak. And if you look, even in, I just referenced, I got out of a place where famine is at what they call IPC 4, which is, and there's only 5 stages. The fifth is absolute starvation. Um, Having the self discipline to actually, and the Stoics actually present and actually challenge Stoics to do this. There's no requirement of fasting like in some religions, but they actually openly promote the idea of fasting, so you can understand what it's like not to have everything you want. They do that, and I think you could see even Seneca talks about set days aside every week to eat very little. And one, it gives you appreciation for food, which at least in America doesn't seem to be. I mean, it's so abundant that there's no appreciation for how easy it is to get. But not just the fasting, but also putting yourself in the cold. They even talked about that. Train your body hard so that when
Yeah.
you need to use it in a difficult situation, running for your life, saving your wife from a burning building, um, it's ready, right? It's having
Yeah.
that self discipline to be prepared for all circumstances. So I think it's, in addition to emotional intelligence, the ability, and of course, I can say this, I think, because I'm an Irish American, controlling your temper, right? It's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of people have a hard time controlling their temper, and in modern society, you got to. And I think part of that is having the ability to cope with that urge to, you know, punch somebody in the nose or yell
Yeah.
at somebody who cut you off in the line, and um,
Yeah.
that is self discipline too. And maybe that's a
Yeah.
part of self discipline that everybody has to deal with on a more regular basis than
Yeah.
the rest of it. But I think that all goes into it.
I think so too. And there's you were interestingly speaking about going. You have to kind of experience these things and go through them to then reach a good level of self discipline and temperance. I mean, being the engineering nerd, right? To temper something is to you improve its hardness and elasticity and ultimately its durability by reheating it and cooling it. So you're actually stressing something, right? Like a metal, right? Your temper
Mhm.
to temper something is you actually heat it up and then you cool it, and then it becomes extra hard. So they temper the edges of knives, or they temper the edge of a chisel, for example. Um, but also to temper something is to sort of neutralize or to counterbalance something. And I think that's an interesting way to think about it as well, right? So you have
Sure.
to go through these things as people, as human beings, and as Stoics, we go through these tough challenges, right? I mean, the ice bath challenge or whatever that kind of thing is, I'm sure resonates with many Stoics because not just for its health benefits, but the fact that like it's bloody cold when you jump in an ice bath.
Yeah,
But
that's
you know,
actually a really good thing to do for your health.
it is. It is. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's an interest,
yeah,
like the health benefit. But what I think is interesting about that is there's a mental health benefit actually to that. Someone was talking about how doing a cold plunge, for example, can help people self-regulate when they're experiencing times of anxiety or ADHD. Now, I don't quote me on that exactly. I didn't read the whole article, but it's something that pops up in my feed because it's something that I'm aware of in the world because I have people in my life that go through that. And I
yeah.
think,
I've actually
that's
read
the
it
thing.
helps with depression, like
Yes,
serious
I've heard that
depression.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm not kind of not surprised because it is tough, right? Like, I'll be I'm not this isn't a brag. I'm just saying like I can count to 90 when I'm in an ice bath, and that's okay. My voice is a lot higher when I come out, let's put it that way. But you know, you get to the point where you do kind of go, oh, I've done that thing, right? But I think in some ways it's the self discipline side of it that allows you to temper that, and then it counterbalances what you're saying. I mean, my background has some Scottish in it. I definitely say there's a bit of a temper there, but it's the question of,
yeah,
making the choice of who you would like to be. So when we
yes,
take all, yeah, so when we take all this together, though, I think this comes back to, and I asked for you that we actually do wisdom last, and there's a reason why. Is because interestingly, when we go through all of these, sorry to move us along, but I think it's important that we look at there was an interesting way that Socrates looked at virtues, which was Socrates thought that all the virtues were just forms of wisdom. I don't know if
uh-huh.
you've come across
Uh-huh.
that in your readings.
Yep, yep,
And yeah, and I think it's interesting when you think about it that way, right? Because temperance is one of those, because you get better at handling tough situations because you have a tough situation and you handle it better than you did the last time or the time before that, right? And you sort of temper yourself through the crucible that is burning away all of the stuff in the world, right? And showing who you really are to yourself. And I think wisdom, I really like the idea that wisdom is they're all forms of wisdom. It's just different applications of it. Courage is wisdom to know to do the right thing. Justice is wisdom to know what fairness is and how to exact fairness on the world around you. And temperance is the wisdom to know that you can control, not in a repressive way, but you can control the extremes of your emotion, right, and your self-control. So but does wisdom resonate like that for you? Like, I'm always curious if everybody else thinks about stoic wisdom that same way.
yeah. I mean, wisdom incorporates a lot. It's not just like do you know a lot of things. That's I guess somewhat important, but it's also having the ability, I think, to um, change your mind, right? In the face of alternate facts, are you a person who can acknowledge that you were incorrect and change your mind? It's also, I think, really important, and we could see examples of contentment. You know, as I think it was Seneca that said, essentially, a wise man, his definition, is content with what he has. Uh, no matter what it is, and not always craving what he doesn't, which is I think a lot of modern society where we are never happy with our possessions or positions in life. we're always wanting more. So it's much more than just the intellect or trying to learn more. It is logic. I mean, early Stoicism was as much about science and logic as it is about virtues, and I think that's also important. Because I think a lot we're seeing a lot less logic uh, being exhibited on social media. It's more about a supporting a position regardless of the facts that are thrown that might be contrary to that. So I really push when it comes to wisdom as a part of a person who's willing to learn, adjust, and change course. Kind of
Yeah.
like the point of science
Yeah,
instead of logic.
you see wisdom coming up as an quick equation where it's intelligence plus experience, and sometimes I like to think of it as intelligence plus experience plus choice, right? You are making a choice to do the right thing as opposed to do the easy thing or do the money making thing, right? So,
Yep.
but that's a tough one because it's a very anything can be rationalized, right? But at the same time, I think it kind of makes sense to me. So, but
Yep. If you
well,
want to improve, be content with looking foolish. Another
yes,
say that.
absolutely. Great quote. I like to think of it from there's a Zen Buddhist practice that I have within my own practice in my life called Shoshin or beginner's mind. And it comes from the parable that the mind of the beginner has many questions while the mind of the expert has few. So I
Oh, that's a good one. That's
yeah.
a good
So
one.
what you and I'd say I'd be interesting, and I'd love to know what you're like in meetings because when I'm in a meeting for engineering, I walk in and I literally people get annoyed with me doing this. I literally will fake like I don't know what they're talking about because the lovely thing is engineers love to talk about stuff they're working on, so they all tell you everything anyways, right? But also I learn more. I learn more by sitting there and saying, I don't know this. Teach me, right? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't assume that I will, and I don't assume what's going to happen. And it does.
Mhm.
And so many times I ask a question, people, they whip their heads around at you with this look on their faces, like, "What is this idiot asking?" Right? But the number of times where I walk out of the room and someone comes up to me and they whisper and they go, "I was really hoping to ask that. Somebody else would ask that question." Right? And
Yep.
so, I think it's the same. You have to be willing to look for it. You have to be willing to look. It's a choice.
Yep.
So,
That's right.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
That's a
we
good
better
point. I
wrap
think
it up.
that's yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was going to say we better wrap it up there. So thank you, thanks so much for the conversation you today, Mick. I know you're on the road, so safe travels, and we'll talk to you soon.
Until next time.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.